Hello. So this is a lecture that will be discussing the work of philosopher Immanuel Kant and his beliefs and philosophies. So he is a classical ethicist, and we will be discussing his influence on modern-day media ethics. So first of all, who was Immanuel Kant? He was a German philosopher during the Age of Enlightenment. He was born April 22nd, 1724, and died on February 12th, 1804. He was born in Königsberg, Prussia, and died in his birthplace of Königsberg, Prussia. Kant's main focuses included epistemology, metaphysics, ethics, and cosmogony. Epistemology is the investigation of what distinguishes our justified beliefs from opinions. Metaphysics is a branch of philosophy that deals with the first principles of things, which includes abstract thinking and abstract theories and concepts such as being, knowing, substance, cause, identity, time, and space. So it's a little more out there, a little more abstract thinking. Ethics, of course, as we all know, is sets of moral principles, especially principles that relate to or affirm a specific group, field, or form of conduct. So in our case for this class, we are focusing on the ethics of media and the ethics of journalism and journalistic writing and reporting. Cosmogony is another field that Kant was pretty interested in, and this is the branch of science that deals with the origin of the universe, especially pertaining to the solar system. So what did Kant believe as a philosopher? So if you are one that studies Kant, believes in his theories, believes in his philosophies, abides by his philosophies, then you would be considered a Kantian or a Kantian thinker. So Kant definitely opposed and rejected utilitarianism. And utilitarianism is a system of ethics in which the rightness or wrongness of an action should be judged by the consequences of the action. So the consequence is judged on the outcome, and if that outcome does the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So that is what a utilitarianist would believe in. Kant completely rejects this, completely opposes this, and he is a proponent of deontological moral theory. And this is a moral theory that says that the rightness or wrongness of actions does not depend on their consequences, but on whether they fulfill our duty as humans and humankind. So Kant believes that actions such as murder, theft, are absolutely prohibited, off limits, no matter your reasoning, no matter your logic, or your motivation of the murder. The outcome is the more important part of this. So whether the outcome is positive or negative, although I don't know how murder could have any type of positive outcome, whether the outcome is positive or negative does not matter. What matters is an action like that is not something that can be universalized and something that we can agree upon is right for everybody to go do. So Kantian ethics believes that there are two questions that one must ask themselves before acting or making a decision. The first question being, can I rationally or reasonably expect everyone to act as I will or am about to or am acting? So if the answer to that question is no, then the action is prohibited and it is probably something that you should not do. So going back to the murder example, if you are, thinking that you're going to go murder somebody, you're not sure if you're going to act on it yet or not, maybe ask yourself, is this something that is reasonable for everybody to go out and do? So is it reasonable for everybody to go around killing one another? Obviously, the answer to that is no. So the action of murder is something that should be off limits and is prohibited. The second question that Kant thinks that we should ask ourselves when making a decision is, does my action respect the goals of all human beings rather than using those goals for my own purposes? Again, if the answer is no, the action is prohibited. The following video is going to help to explain Kant's moral philosophy. It is pretty lengthy, so I'll just show the first couple minutes and then pause that and then head on to the next slide.
The first thing you need to know about Kant's moral philosophy is that he's not trying to convince you that morality exists. If you're one of those people who goes, oh, morality is just an illusion and it doesn't really exist, well then you're probably still going to think that when you're done reading Kant. What he is doing is saying, come on lads, we all know that people behave in a way that they call moral, at least some of the time. Morality, it's a thing We do it and we talk about it. So what's the best way to try and understand it? He starts by asking, what does it mean to be good? And he says that the only thing that is good without qualification is the good will to do the right thing. Everything else, money, courage, intelligence, good looks, those things can be used for good or evil. But the will to do good is always good. And it's not good because of what you can get out of it. Your rewards for being good, again, you could use them for good or ill. The good will must be good in itself. We don't always act according to the good will. We are imperfect, and sometimes we act according to our other desires. But acting from the good will, Kant says, is the only way to really be moral. Consider a bartender who gets a new customer in their bar. The bartender could give the customer the wrong change and save a bit of money, but he decides not to. He gives the customer the correct change. Kant asks, why did he do that? If he did it because he was afraid of getting caught, or because he wanted repeat business, or even just because it makes him happy, well then that's not a genuinely good action, because it wasn't motivated by the good will. It was motivated by the desire to get something else. For Kant, it's not the consequences of your actions that matter so much as that you do them for the right reasons. The only genuinely good actions are the ones that you do purely out of a respect for the moral rules. Whatever those moral rules are, and we'll come to them shortly.
All right, so that was an excellent example of Kant's moral theory. The example of the bartender who could have pocketed the change, given her the wrong change, to increase his tips for the night. So that was definitely more of like a modern day example of why Kant would disagree with that. So Kant's categorical imperative is something that, if you are unfamiliar with, can be a little bit overwhelming, but it really isn't when you actually kind of break it down. So his categorical imperative really says that morality is meant to guide our actions, and Kant he takes his morality and the idea of morality very seriously. So we act on maxims, principle of actions, and what we intend. So a maxim is, an action that we're going to take. So if that maxim is something that can be universalized and that everybody can agree upon, is something that is good and that is good for humankind, then it is something that we should do. If the maxim is something that we cannot agree upon, that should be universalized. If it's not good for humankind, if it's not beneficial to humans in general and the will of humans, then it is something that we should not act on. Morality is universal, the same for everybody. So everybody has the same wants, the same needs, the same wills, that we should have some sort of moral code that covers all of this, so that we are looking out for the will of humankind in our decision making. So he concludes that you should act only on that maxim through which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. So, like we said, murdering people should not be something that is universalized, should not be something that everybody should be allowed to go out and do. That means that we should only act on a maxim if it is something that everybody can agree upon is universally okay. So an example on this slide says stealing. So if we could all just go around stealing whatever we want, everybody can go. If I want your car, I'm going to steal your car, and then you go and steal that car back. It would just be chaos. So this is not something that we can universally agree upon. So the following video here I have is a little over 10 minutes long. So again, it is lengthier, so I'll play a little bit of it and then pause it. But this is a video that focuses on Kant's categorical imperatives. There are many of them, so I'll just play a little bit of this.
Crash Course Philosophy is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace, share your passion with the world.
I don't know if you've noticed this, but all of our discussions about ethics so far have had one thing in common: God. Divine command theory, for example, argues that what's good and what's not are determined by a deity, whether that's the God of Abraham or a panoply of gods who come up with ethical rules by committee. And the theory of natural law, as advanced by Thomas Aquinas, says that morality comes from us, but only because we were made by God, who preloaded us with moral sensibilities. But many other thinkers have argued that humanity's moral code doesn't come from some supernatural force. 18th century German philosopher Immanuel Kant, for one, thought that religion and morality were a terrible pairing, and if anything, the two should be kept apart. Instead, Kant argued, in order to determine what's right, you have to use reason, and a sense of consideration for other people, and, at least the way I'm teaching it today, jobs. Kant took morality pretty seriously, and he thought we should too. All of us, regardless of our religious beliefs or lack thereof. Because he knew that if we look to religion for our morality, we're not all going to get the same answer. But he thought morality was a constant in an almost mathematical sense. 2 + 2 = 4, whether you're a Christian, Buddhist, or atheist. And for Kant, the same went for moral truths. But he made a distinction between the things we ought to do morally and the things we ought to do for other non-moral reasons. He pointed out that most of the time, whether or not we ought to do something isn't really a moral choice. Instead, it's just contingent on our desires. Like, if your desire is to get money, then you ought to get a job. If your desire is to get an A in class, then you ought to study. Kant called these if-then statements hypothetical imperatives. They're commands that you should follow if you want something. But hypothetical imperatives are about prudence rather than morality. So if you don't want money, you can always choose not to work. And if you don't care about getting a good grade, studying becomes totally optional. It'd be a terrible option, in my opinion, as an educator, but still, optional. But Kant viewed morality not in terms of hypothetical imperatives, but through what he called categorical imperatives. These are commands you must follow, regardless of your desires. Categorical imperatives are our moral obligations, and Kant believed that they're derived from pure reason. He said it doesn't matter whether you want to be moral or not. The moral law is binding on all of us. And he said you don't need religion to determine what that law is, because what's right and wrong is totally knowable just by using your intellect. Okay, so how do you figure out what's moral? Kant said the categorical imperative can be understood in terms of various formulations, basically different ways of phrasing or looking at the same essential idea. And he came up with 4 formulations of the categorical imperative. Let me tell you about the 2 most popular ones. The first formulation of the categorical imperative is often known as the universalizability principle. And Kant phrased it this way: act only according to that maxim, which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law without contradiction. Okay, Kant. Pretty wordy guy, so let's unpack what he was saying. A maxim is just a rule or principle of action, and a universal law is something that must always be done in similar situations. So, as a Kantian, before I act, I would ask myself, what's the maxim of my action? In other words, what's the general rule that stands behind the particular action I'm considering? Let's say you forgot your wallet in your dorm this morning. You don't have time to get up between classes, and you're really hungry. You notice that the student working at the snack kiosk in the Union is engrossed in a conversation, and you could easily snag a banana and be on your way. Sorry, chom. You could easily swipe that chom and be on your way. Is it okay, morally, for you to do this? Well, the particular action you are considering, taking a chom from a merchant without paying for it, is stealing. And if you approve of the maxim of stealing, which you're doing whether you admit it or not, then what you're actually doing is universalizing that action. You're saying that everyone should always steal. If you should be able to do it, then everyone should be able to do it. The thing is, this leads to a contradiction, and remember, Kant's wording specifically says that moral actions cannot bring about contradictions. The contradiction here is no one would say that everyone should steal all the time, because if everyone should always steal, then you should steal the chom, and then I should steal it back from you, and then you should steal it back from me, and it would never end, and no one would ever get to eat any chom. Therefore, stealing isn't universalizable. So what Kant's really saying is that it's not fair to make exceptions for yourself. You don't really think stealing is okay, and by imagining what it would be like to universalize it, that becomes clear. Now, Kant...
Okay, so sorry that I played that for a bit lengthy there, but I really wanted that example of the stealing to be in there, because I really think that definitely illustrates, a good understanding of a categorical imperative. So when we think about Kant and how he would feel about modern issues, when we have an understanding of how he makes decisions, it might, kind of help to clear up how he would feel about things that are frequently covered and happening in our world today that the media is covering. So, for example, like abortion. How would Kant feel about abortion? Well, he would probably feel that, a woman choosing to, not have her baby that way would make it universally acceptable for everyone to not have their babies that way, and then, that would just become like a bigger issue. Mass shootings kind of goes back to the murder example. Is it okay for people to just go around shooting each other? No. Unfortunately, mass shootings are something that are, becoming a huge issue in our world today. But, we do have to make sure that it is something that does not become universalized, it's never, okay for people to go around shooting each other. So he would definitely think that that is something that obviously cannot be universalized, so is something that we do not do. Theft, again, with the example of stealing the banana on campus. We don't go around stealing things because then it makes it okay for everybody to go around stealing things, and it would just be chaos and a disaster, and no one would ever have any respect for anyone else's things. So that's not something that we can agree is universally acceptable, so not something that we should do. Murder, again, we've talked about. Fake news, which is a huge issue in journalism today. Definitely a problem because it is becoming so widely accepted, and people are reading these things on news sites that is clearly fake, and people that are not aware that it's fake are being given false information, which kind of almost makes it feel acceptable for journalists, or anyone for that matter, to put fake news out there because it is becoming so universally accepted. Kant would definitely disagree with the distribution of fake news today and how frequent and how popular it is, because you're spreading information that is false, you're giving people false information, and that is not good for that's not good for the, for humankind. So he would definitely disagree with fake news becoming so universalized, and sadly it is so universalized now, that we do have to step back and think, what is this doing for humankind? What is this doing for the will of humans? They're not getting the correct information. They're spreading information that's incorrect. People's reputations are getting damaged, things like that. So that pretty much is a brief overview of Kant and his categorical imperative, his moral philosophy, and what he believes. Thank you for listening.